Hi, it's Kim Boon. By now, most Singaporeans have heard about the big hoo-ha around Pritam Singh's interview with Keluar Kejap, and I already shared my thoughts in another video, but I think it's timely to talk about something: the rules of engagement between podcasters, politicians, and Singaporeans. So the podcast scene in Singapore is growing, but when it comes to politics, it just feels a bit opportunistic and not very intentional. Like when you think about the daily catch up, politics is not the main dish, and it's something that is served up when it's trending. And this is not an indictment, by the way, because podcasts have to go with the path of least resistance and talk about what the majority of Singaporeans want to hear regularly. So I've been doing YouTube for about 5 months, 6 days now, not that anyone's counting, and I'm still very much a nobody in the podcasting space. But during the lead up to GE 2025, I had the chance to speak with some veterans in the podcast space and with politicians across the political spectrum. And what I've come to realize is this: that the rules of engagement between podcasters and politicians is not very clear, and everyone's kind of figuring it out as they go. So podcasters didn't quite move the needle in GE 2025, but I think we did start to change the way Singaporeans engage with politics. And I think our role will only grow. Why? Because I think it's one of the easiest and most effective way for the opposition to reach Singaporeans. And once that happens, the incumbent PAP will have no choice but to respond in kind, because the numbers simply don't lie. Let's take Pasir Ris Changi GRC as an example. It has around 166,000 residents. On average, there are 3 people per household in Singapore. So that means the SDA and PAP who contested there will need to cover roughly 54,000 households over the next 5 years. Now, PAP has a well-oiled machine to engage residents. So Minister Indrani and her 3 teammates walk the ground every week. So let's say optimistically that each MP manages to speak with 50 households a week. So multiply that by 52 weeks, then by 5 years, that's 13,000 households per MP. So with 4 MPs, that's 52,000 households, less than the 54,000 that we estimated. And that's assuming everything goes perfectly, by the way, that people are home, that are willing to talk, and even then, you're barely managing a round of engagement per household in one election cycle. Now, imagine doing that with just 1 or 2 volunteer teams, like what most opposition face. So the Singapore Democratic Alliance, or SDA, does not have the same resources. Their folks from the Singapore Justice Party and PKMS are out every week, but it's a huge uphill task. Which brings me back to the point that podcasting is the ultimate equalizer, or at least it can be. And this isn't just my own little theory. The opposition themselves have recognized this.
The last election is a loud wake-up call for PSP, building a stronger trust with Singaporeans on the ground, helping Singaporeans to understand government's policies better, making our voice louder online.
For the past 10 years, we did not share much in the social media or expose ourselves more on what we are doing. Many people thought that we are just fly by night. Every 5 years, just appear one.
So that was PSP's Secretary General Leong Man Wai and SDA's Desmond Lim, both talking about the importance of stepping up social media efforts. And in the background, I know that other parties have also begun reaching out to podcasters like myself to build working relationships. But here's the thing about relationships: they cut both ways. So those of you working in companies know what I mean. HR will never allow a husband and wife to work in the same department. A supervisor dating subordinate, confirm kena flag. Why? Because it creates perceived bias whether or not it's actually there. So we saw this same tension in Pritam Singh's situation, where he chose to go on a Malaysian podcast instead of a local one. So some have criticized that decision, suggesting that maybe Pritam had to go abroad because local podcasters are seen to be too close to the PAP, or some of them are called PAP dog. So after all, the government is a major advertiser, and with advertising comes money and influence. Now, there are 2 schools of thoughts here. One is that this is just a necessary evil. And I use that word loosely, because if we want a vibrant podcasting scene, it has to be financially attractive. We can't expect every full-time podcaster to sacrifice their earnings for some noble, greater good. And if you don't know how podcasters earn money, let me break it down. At least from a YouTuber's point of view, because that's the only platform I'm on. First, there's YouTube ad revenue. So we create content, YouTube sells the ads, and we get 55% while YouTube gets 45%. But the total amount that we earn is honestly peanuts. Not even fresh grad salary peanuts, like kacang putih peanuts, that kind of pay. Then there's affiliate marketing, where someone talks about a product like the best toilet bowl that they have ever used, includes a link to buy this magic toilet bowl, and then the content creator gets a cut every time someone buys it. So finally, there's direct sponsorship. So that's when companies or the government pay to be featured. So that's usually the big money. But if you take that away, you're really capping income of content creators. And when you limit the money, you also limit the quality and consistency of content creators and the podcast community. Now, I think there's space for what I call recreational content creators. People with day jobs but have strong opinions. Maybe instead of grabbing a drink on Tuesday nights, they film a podcast about politics or social issues. Not unlike some of our politicians, actually. So we don't see many of these voices yet, but it's growing. And hey, even just the YouTube ad money alone can make for some decent pocket money. Enough to justify the effort. And they can speak their minds while maintaining independence both in reality and perception. And that's actually the kind of space I see Red Dot Perspective sitting in. Now, of course, bias doesn't only come from money. Sometimes it's personal. It's easier to criticize someone when they're just a name in a newspaper in 2D, right? But once you meet them, once they become human to you, it's much harder to call them out. I mean, you keyboard warriors know exactly what I'm talking about. So that's why when I first started Red Dot Perspective, I kept a deliberate arm's length from politicians. Now, politics as a topic is different. In most media, the journalists chase stories. But in politics, the onus is on the politicians to communicate. It's a one-way street. So you say something, but that doesn't mean people listen. And as a political podcasters, I don't really need to hunt down those insider gossips. I just need to look at what's already out in the open and ask, what does this mean for the average voters? And that's why I avoided doing interviews. And in fact, I've only done 4, one for PAP, WP, PSP, and an independent candidate. And that's because I realized that there are other podcasters who are much, much better at getting strong narratives out of politicians. I actually said this in a roundtable with inconvenient questions, that in the marketplace of content, we do the work that we're best at, and I let the brilliant interviewers do their thing, and I'll focus on the analysis, because I think that's my value add. So I think the local podcast scene will eventually and gradually split into 2 groups. First, the interviewers, the ones with broad appeal like the Daily Catch Up and Yalabat, who cover everything from dating to politics. So these are the trusted names that politicians can tap on to build reach and relatability. Then there are analysts, the folks like Associate Professor Wallet, Dr. Gillian Cole, Dr. Eugene Tan comes to mind. They take the data, both qualitative and quantitative, and break it down for the public. I think this space is sorely lacking in Singapore because it's quite hard work and it's risky. One misstep and you're getting flamed by all sides. And politics isn't really about who's absolutely right or wrong. It's about how right or how wrong someone or something is and at what point in time. So as an analyst, you're never really fully aligned with any camp. You get whacked left, right, center, as I learned. And it's quite mentally draining, to be honest. Which brings me to how politicians engage podcasters. So this part applies especially to those of us doing analysis. Here's the thing. As politician, not everyone's going to like you. And podcasters will call you out. That's just part of the game. And I get why politicians might be scared to watch videos about themselves because you never really know whether it's going to be a praise or a roasting. But if you put yourself up for election, if you voluntarily stepped into public eye, this scrutiny is part of the deal. And I won't name names, but I was quite disappointed by how some politicians reacted to unfavorable coverage during GE 2025. Some of that frustration got misdirected at me and at fellow podcasters. But if we want a long-term symbiotic relationship, one where we are all working towards a more informed and more democratic Singapore, I think we got to drop this pettiness. Even from a self-interest point of view, picking fights with the people helping to get your message out is just, I guess, dumb, right? It's a bad strategy and, don't shoot your own microphone. That said, I genuinely believe that most of our politicians across the spectrum are good people. They stepped forward because they care. And I think many of us in the podcast space feel the same way. We're not here to stir drama for fun. I think we just want to be part of something bigger. For me personally, Red Dot Perspective is about civil discourse. I try to be fair in how I present facts. I'm moderate, but I'm not always neutral. So when I feel strongly about something, I'll take a position, like with the handshake incident with Ms. Gan Xiaohuang or the NDP one with Mr. Ravi Philaman. I think viewers have the right to then agree or disagree with me, but I hope at the very least we can all engage. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. And if someone watches one of my videos and walks away with a better understanding of an issue, or they go into the voting booth informed, whether they vote PAP, WP, or any of the alternatives, honestly, I don't really care because I think I've done my job. And with that, we come to the end of today's episode. And okay, people keep scolding me for not asking this. So here goes, right? If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe. Whether you're watching on the way to work or as part of your TV rotation, it really helps out to push this content out to more Singaporeans. And as usual, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you all at the next episode of Red Dot Perspective.